Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. 2 in 1 day, that's right, because we're going to be taking a look at the Preseason 2022 PBE preview. There's a ton of fun stuff for us to break down in terms of what Riot are going to be doing. We finally have stat lines for all of the items that they've revealed. There's a lot of fun stuff that we can talk about here now that we have more details, so let's go ahead and crack on with some of the updates that Riot are giving us for the new Preseason 2022 stuff. Now, moving on to the Chemtech Drake here first, I think the biggest thing to note here is that Riot said earlier that the buff would be enemies at low health deal more damage. So I was expecting something like the Spite passive on Gore Drinker, or the old Spite passive on Gore Drinker now that it's been removed. But either way, instead it's you get bonus damage against enemies with more current health than you. Now this is a big deal because not only does it mean that tanks really hate the Chemtech Drake, because everyone is going to get more damage against them. They're stacking health, which is hilarious because Urgot, a Chemtech user, is a health stacker, and this works against him. Haha, funny. But that's a big deal because this, in general, dramatically increases the value of this buff. I think this is actually crazy good, especially if you can stack this up to a couple different times, get 15% increased damage against enemies just for having more health than you. That, I think, is a huge deal, and it makes Chemtech Drake really, really strong on its own. The Second Life, still no real details on how this works, but like I said before, it seems really strong, a lot stronger than any of the other souls. And finally, the terrain here, the important thing to note is that the camouflaged enemies are not revealed by regular vision wards in the camouflage zones. Now, what this means is that, interestingly enough, your warding patterns will have to change to not be placing wards in the camouflage zone because they won't do anything unless they're control wards. So you have to kind of ward the entrances and exits to the camouflage zones in order to maybe catch enemy champions in rotation as they go to or from the camouflage zones. Either way, I think that's really, really interesting to have those kind of details, and I'm really excited actually to try out the Chemtech terrain, maybe not the Chemtech buff though. The Hextech Drake, nothing has changed here, except for the fact that we now confirm that the Hex Gates can be traveled between each other. They're not one way, so you can go back and forth between them, but there is a brief channel that is disabled by stuns or damage. This is a big deal because it means that you can sort of pop in, steal a camp or two, and then pop back out to your side of the jungle, but also means that if you're seen doing this, the enemy team has a lot of ways to prevent you from using the gate to get back out to safety, and therefore you can still end up in enemy territory without a way home, which I do quite like. I feel like there are going to be a lot of scenarios where you can escape from enemies by finding a hexed gate, doing the brief channel, and teleporting away from them. They can follow you, but then they have to kind of make the decision as to whether or not you did go through the gate or not, right? There's some kind of funny things you could do, so really excited to see how that works. The buff and the Dragon Soul, nothing's changed from what we've already talked about before, so I won't waste time there. Objective bounties. Now, this is interesting to me because Riot have basically said that the objective bounty is highlighted on the minimap for both teams. There's a 15-second warning period and a 15-second lingering duration when falling off. The duration can be extended if the losing team is exclusively fighting the active objective bounty. The biggest thing here for me is that there's no details as to how an objective is chosen as the objective bounty, right? Is this a sort of rotating thing? Is it chosen at random? Is it one thing and one thing only for an extended duration of time? Like, I don't know how that works, and that I think is a big deal because it feels like potentially Kindred Mark where, okay, cool, they've marked Baron. Well, we're not doing Baron right now, you know? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So we'll kind of see how it works. I do like the gold rewards here. I think those are a big deal for the losing team in particular to try and help get back into the game. But I would like more details about objective bounties before I can really give a truly objective opinion on the new mechanic. Moving on to items here. Starting with Crown of the Shattered Queen, this is the new Mage Mythic. I think this is absurd. You get 50% DR. That lasts for a second and a half after taking champion damage. And you gain ability power while you have this 50% DR. This is massive. That's Alistar ult. That's not even just Alistar ult. That's Alistar ult at rank 2 for free until you hit combat for the first time. I think that's absolutely massive. I think it's crazy good. The only reason I think it may not be broken is because it's going to be built on mages that are fairly squishy, and once it wears off, they just kind of die. There is a 40-second cooldown on this, so it is in terms of items is like Banshee's Veil, where if that pops, it takes a long time for it to come back off, so there is some reward to poking it off. I don't know. I think it's going to be really good. It may not be as crazy effective as I'm making it out to be, but I think it's going to be a lot better than Riot initially anticipated to be. And I think 50% DR is quite a bit, but we'll go on and move on from there. Even Shroud is our new support mythic, or support tank mythic, by allowing you to immobilize enemy champions, or when you are immobilized, all nearby enemies take increased damage by 12% for 5 seconds. That's kind of nice for setup. I do like the stat line on it. It's fairly decent. I do feel like it's not as beefy as some of the other true tank mythics, so in that regard, I feel like a lot of true tanks won't want to be building this, but there is the potential for it to be a really good sort of break of the fight item, especially for someone like Leona. So I do feel like it's going to be okay. And it gives flat resist, so big tanks don't really care about it that much. It feels like this is good for champions that want the game to end early. Again, like Leona, who is very good early, can buy this early on, get flat on MR and magic resistance, or MR and armor, and then be able to have that bonus damage as well. That seems like it could be pretty good. Frostfire Gauntlets here. I don't know why. The stat line's exactly the same. Nothing has changed. Except for the fact that maybe they're highlighting the fact that there is no more ranged melee split for the Snowbind passive, but besides that, this is the same item. Turbo Chem Tank is mostly the same item, except now it has another passive that allows you to fill up the Chem Tank, and add 100 stacks. Your next basic attack deals bonus magic damage to all nearby enemies when you make that auto attack. This, I think, is really nice, as it gives you more of a reward for actually closing the gap, as opposed to just getting close enough, which I feel like a lot of times is what Chem Tank was used for, is just get in close enough to, Skarner R them, or to hit him with the slow field and then be able to engage from there. This now specifically says if you're able to get that first auto attack, you're rewarded a lot more. This also means that a champion like Udyr is still going to really, really like this item. So I do think that's a kind of a nice buff to Turbo Chem Tank, especially given that it's sort of fallen out of the meta for quite some time. Winter's Approach is the new mana tank item, and hilariously, I was super concerned that it was going to be abusable by mages. It kind of sort of isn't, and that's because they gave it an awe passive. And so they did tweak the awe passive on Seraph's Embrace, so it is a little bit different than it was before. But if you can consider, right, if you're a mage, you don't want to buy this because it was going to shut you out of actually being able to buy a Seraph's. So even if you want to abuse this for the shield that you're able to get off of this, there's no reason to do it, because then you also can't get Seraph's. Obviously, someone like Rise, who gets damage for mana, can, but you feel a lot worse, especially when you look at the updated Seraph's Embrace, which we'll get to here down in a sec. But either way, I do quite like the decision on this. I like the fact that it gives bonus health based on mana. This, I think, is going to feel really good for tanks that want to be itemizing lots of mana. Really, really nice item, and happy to see how Riot were able to get this into a good spot. Axiom Arc is the Assassin reset item. Interestingly, this works differently than I expected. Instead of refunding all of the non-ultimate abilities, it refunds the ultimate ability by 25% as well. So especially if you have a bunch of ability haste already built up, you have a low cooldown ultimate, you get the first frag, your ultimate will come back off cooldown faster, which means that if you get a pick in a side lane and then go rejoin your team, you're more likely to have that ultimate for that ensuing 4v5 to exploit your advantage, as opposed to, well, I already burned my ultimate as Zed, so I'm not that useful in a team fight. So, interesting item. It'll be fun to see who actually ends up building this, as I think there are a few champions in mind that may be able to get value out of it, but I want to kind of wait and see who actually decides they like it. Shadow Flame is the new flat penetration item for mages. The interesting thing here is that you get maximum magic penetration when the target is at low health, which then obviously makes it better for an execute, and it also gives you the max penetration automatically if the target was recently affected by shields. That's really neat. I do like how this item kind of works, and it's going to be really good for burst mages or just champions that want more upfront raw burst damage to kill squishies off. Cosmic Drive has had a minor rework here. Basically, you gain Phase Rush permanently while you're in combat after you damage champions with 3 separate attacks or spells. Now, overall, the general stat package of this is worse, but also you get to keep the movement speed and ability power until you leave combat. Now, this also is a big deal for champions like Mordekaiser, for example, who can get in a fight and then sort of falls off because if he can't stick to people, he doesn't do that much. This means now Mordekaiser can R somebody, proc his passive, proc Cosmic Drive, and Death Realm, come out, and then have all this bonus ability power and movement speed to continue the fight from there. I think it's going to be a really exciting item for AP bruisers especially, but there are some other champions that I think will be able to get a lot of value off of this as well, such as Lilia. Horizon Focus can now also trigger off of slows, as well as Riley's Crystal Scepter. I think that's sort of a nice quality of life change here, and it does give it a little bit more of a broad appeal, as opposed to its fairly small niche right now, which is like specifically if you're an artillery mage or have easily applicable CC. So I do like this. Demonic Embrace has been slightly reworked to be better for tanks. I believe the 2 and 1.2% max health magic damage is a melee ranged split there. Not entirely sure, but it could be. But also the big thing here is that it converts 2% of your bonus health to ability power. So it feels a little bit worse on all the dot mages that are building this and exploiting it, right? Because they don't care about the resist or the resist help, right? But now, because it specifically says you need bonus health to get more ability power, I think it's more suited towards durable champions that are building health. Again, like Mordekaiser. So really excited to play Mordekaiser on this patch if you guys couldn't tell. Seraph's Embrace, as I mentioned before, this is changing very slightly. Now the stacking is, the all passive is giving you ability haste based on 1.3% of your bonus mana. And then you also restore health now equal to 40% of the mana spent, up to 50 plus 10% AP per cast. So this is less of a sort of crowning max AP damage item and more of a flexible item that gives you a lot more ability haste and gives you sustain. This immediately springs to mind Cassiopeia as being a really powerful champion for this, and as well it just gives mages with very quick ability casts the ability to kind of sustain their way through fights without needing something like Conquer, so Rise even, for example. So really happy to see where this item is at, and like I said, again, they've changed the all passive very slightly, so excited to see where that goes. Force of Nature is going to feel much better after this patch. Now, instead of just giving you stacks that give you resist and movement speed as you take damage, instead you gain stacks that give you no benefit at all up until you hit maximum stacks, and then at max stacks you take 20% reduced magic damage and gain 10% increased movement speed. The MR as well on this item has been increased overall, so this is actually pretty big because 20% reduced magic damage really makes you hard to kill with magic damage. So I think Force of Nature is actually going to be a very strong item going forward, whereas right now it's sort of a niche pick that isn't really worth your time. Knight's Vow has sort of been changed back to what it was prior to the Mythic Forge update. Now it still gives you back the healing when your worthy ally deals damage to champions, you get some healing back, and it also increases the damage reduction to 20% if they're at less than 30% health, which is kind of a nice way to kind of keep them alive. I do think this is a better iteration of the item than the current one, where you get movement speed towards the ally when they're low. I just don't think that was ever a relevant mechanic. Hilariously, Abyssal Mask is back to what it was way back in the day, back in the days of Abyssal Rod, where it now reduces enemy magic resist in an aura, and you gain magic resist for every cursed enemy, which is absolutely hilarious. Riot said, oh, we're going to be reworking Abyssal Mask to not conflict with the new tank mythic, stay tuned, and they didn't rework it, they just reverted it back to its original state, so that's kind of funny, but I do think the passive is going to be good. There are going to be places where this is going to be very powerful. Finally, onto runes here. Lethal Tempo's had a small rework, which I think is really interesting. Lethal Tempo's always been kind of in a weird spot where it's sort of a threatening rune. You deal damage to one guy, and everyone has to back away until your Lethal Tempo wears off. Now, instead of it being the sort of in-combat DPS, max DPS type rune, now you gain attack speed for 6 seconds when you hit an enemy champion with an attack. It stacks up to 6 times, and when it's at its cap, you also gain attack range and increase your attack speed cap to 3.0. For those of you who are familiar with Urgot's W, how rapidly he attacks, that's 3 attacks a second, so you can kind of get a sense for how fast you can attack. Notably, this means that Lethal Tempo no longer uncaps your attack speed. You are hard capped at 3.0, which means that you can't do silly things like building a ton of bonus attack speed, triggering Lethal Tempo, and then just being able to get back to the machine gun Kog'Maw 5 attacks a second, right? Like, that was really silly. So you can't do that anymore. But it does also give you a stackable attack speed bonus that also gives attack range at maximum stacks, which is really scary on a champion like Jinx, for example, or Kog'Maw or Tristana, who, when they maximally stack this out, they have a range of like outside towers or something crazy like that. So really excited to see how this rune plays out. I think it's going to be much better. Glogment has been changed as well. It no longer has the auto attack for a slow passive. Now, whenever you immobilize an enemy champion, you get Glacial Rays to emanate from them towards you and other nearby champions, creating frozen zones that slow enemies for 40% and reduce their damage by 15% against your allies, not including yourself. This is interesting because it sort of makes this more of a supportive rune or a peeling rune. This is the kind of thing that you can use when you're trying to get champions away from your friends, and it creates a slowing field to make it harder for them to continue to close the gap. They deal less damage, so even if you're still in range, you're going to take less damage off of this. Big change here on Glacial Augment. I really am a fan of this. And finally, on to First Strike, which is a new Inspiration Tree rune, likely replacing Prototype Omnistone, because let's be real, Omnistone was never taken on anybody. But First Strike, continuing in the grand tradition of Inspiration runes being unbalanceable, I think First Strike is right in that same category. After you damage an enemy champion with an attack or ability before they do, you gain 5 gold and First Strike, causing your attacks or abilities to deal 12% extra damage against them, and 100% or 70% for ranged units of that damage dealt as gold. Now, this is the extra damage, not the damage of the auto attack. That would be silly. It still means that there is a ton of bonus gold that can be generated by champions that take First Strike. I feel like this is Riot trying to make a fixed version of Kleptomancy, but I do feel like this is still going to be really, really good and probably going to need nerfs in the future, so we'll kind of see. Also, no word on Ravenous Hunter in this patch at all. I'm hoping Riot either remove it or find a way to make a balance, because let's be real, that rune is not worth taking. And finally, the first Rift Scuttler in a game has 35% reduced health, 80% reduced XP, and slightly reduced in size to make it less swingy, so you're not as dependent on getting that first crab in order to be relevant in the jungle. A lot of really spicy things here today, guys. There's a lot I could continue to talk about, but this video is long enough as is, so let me know which changes you're most excited for down in the comments and what details that I might have missed that may change how we're kind of considering these things. So let me know all that down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I plan to do every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.